We will reveal the financial time bomb of unfunded liabilities with one man who knows more about it than almost anyone else. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my most pugnacious panel, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the author and journalist, Michael Craik. As ever, I want to hear your views. It's a crucial part of the programme, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Sophia Wensler.
Jacob, thank you. It's just gone 8 o'clock. These are your headlines from the GB Newsroom. Millions of Americans across the US are casting their votes as Donald Trump and Kamala Harris compete to become the next president in what is being described as a historically close race. Donald Trump has arrived to vote in Florida alongside his wife Melania. The former president spoke to media saying, "I hear we're doing very well."
I feel very confident. I have felt. We went in with a very big lead today, and it looks like Republicans have shown up in force. I don't have to tell them that there'll be no violence. Of course there'll be no violence. My supporters are not violent people. I don't have to tell them that. And I certainly don't want any violence, but I certainly don't have to tell. These are great people. These are people that believe in no violence.
And Republican vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance has also cast his vote. Speaking outside the polling station, Trump's running mate said, "We do expect to win." Meanwhile, Joe Biden has called on voters to make history by electing Kamala Harris as his successor as he prepared for a quiet election day at the White House. To the Middle East now, where Israel's Prime Minister has fired his Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, saying it's down to a crisis of trust between them. Benjamin Netanyahu said in a statement that his trust in Gallant had eroded in recent months. He added that Foreign Minister Israel Katz will replace Gallant. Back at home now, Kemi Badenoch has held her first shadow cabinet meeting today, saying she will win back the trust of the public with a team effort as she released her first full cabinet this morning. Chris Philp has been announced as Shadow Home Secretary, while Jesse Norman has been appointed Shadow Leader of the House. Notably, there is no role for Tom Tugendhat, who was a contender in the leadership race. Yesterday, Badenoch's former rival, Robert Jenrick, accepted the role of Shadow Justice Secretary, while the former Work and Pension Secretary, Mel Stride, is the new Shadow Chancellor. And former Home Secretary Priti Patel has been appointed Shadow Foreign Secretary. Sir Keir Starmer has responded to a letter from Sir Alan Bates calling for faster compensation payments for postmasters impacted by the Post Office scandal. It comes after Mr Bates claimed he had contacted the Prime Minister twice in the last month, but he was still waiting for a response. In his letter, he demanded a March 2025 deadline for compensation for the sub-postmaster victims of the scandal. However, Number 10 declined to commit to the campaigner's suggested payment deadline. And the Queen is unwell with a chest infection and has had to withdraw from her engagements this week. That's according to Buckingham Palace. Sir Keir Starmer posted on X saying, "On behalf of the whole country, I wish Her Majesty the Queen a speedy recovery." The Duchess of Gloucester has stepped in on behalf of the Queen to attend the annual opening of the Field of Remembrance at Westminster Abbey on Thursday. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. It's not long to go until polls close in the United States election. And don't forget, GB News' coverage will be running all night from 11 o'clock. I'll be discussing the US election shortly. But first, it's another betrayal of Brexit. It was said occasionally by Brexiteers during the referendum campaign, though not nearly enough, that the EU was becoming the United States of Europe. When Nigel Farage, who you may have heard of, raised the concerns of the European army, it was dismissed by the then Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, now I think with some American internet company, as a dangerous fantasy. It was, of course, a policy officially endorsed as an aspiration by Emmanuel Macron, the President of France, and Angela Merkel, the former Chancellor of Germany. What Remainers never really wanted to admit to the public, possibly because they didn't really like the idea anyway, was that the European project wanted to go on to move Europe from being a coalition of nations to being a single state. Well, Sir Keir Starmer, also famous for wanting a second referendum, now appears to be keen to drag us back into one of the EU's key federalist policies, Europe's Justice and Home Affairs wing, under the guise of smashing the gangs. At the Interpol meeting yesterday in Glasgow, he claimed that Brexit had meant the UK no longer had access to the European arrest warrant database and that he wanted this restored. But beyond an illusion, any restoration of the pre-Brexit settlement will come at a cost. In this case, almost certainly our return to the European arrest warrant. But this system not only gives jurisdiction to European judges in the UK, as it would be ruled on by the Court of Justice of the European Union, but it would treat the UK as a state within their federation, rather than the position we have restored, that of a sovereign nation. The Prime Minister is meeting European leaders on Thursday in Hungary, with a new EU security pact expected to be at the top of his agenda. But this is merely the first step in dragging us back to the EU via the back door. Keir Starmer has always wanted to be in the EU. He didn't want to leave. He wanted a second referendum. And now, bit by bit, they're trying to get us in. It's like the frog in water. The water is gradually warming up. But we're alert. We're not going to be frog-like and be gently boiled. As ever, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com. Well, I'm really pleased now to be joined by a friend of the programme, Labour Party advisor, Scarlett Maguire. Scarlett, thank you as always for coming in. Right. Much appreciated. But
honestly, I think you've gone completely over the top, Jacob. This is not about getting back into
the arrest
Brexit.
Warrant. It's about the arrest warrant.
No, it's about much more than the arrest warrant, right? It's about that we need to be able to share a lot of information with Europe if we're going to do anything.
But we already share via Europol, where we have access, and through Interpol. We've got two independent means of accessing it. But what Starmer has said he wanted to do, Sir Keir Starmer said he wanted to do, is get into the database of the European arrest warrant. Now, the European arrest warrant was a really dangerous mechanism that undermined the rights of British citizens and meant that they could be taken away to countries that don't have a proper rule of law just by the say-so of a foreign judge. Now, this was really dangerous.
No, I think you're really wrong. I think the European arrest warrant meant that you couldn't come to Britain and feel safe away as a criminal, right? That if you committed a crime in Europe and you came to Britain, that you could be arrested. Yeah. But look,
but extradition has proper protections for British subjects, and we used the extradition warrant, you may remember, disgracefully against a family who took their son to the Czech Republic for cancer treatment. The NHS said it wouldn't work. It then did work. Unfortunately, the arrest warrant was rescinded, but it was used aggressively, improperly, but it is ruled on by the European Court of Justice. So if you get back into that system, you are getting back into the legal system of the European Union, and that is where sovereignty lies. Who is your highest court? Where is your highest court? Is it in the UK? Is it the High Court of Parliament? Or is it the EU court?
Look, if we're talking extradition, our extradition treaty with the United States is terrible.
I agree with that completely.
Right, I mean, it's absolutely terrible.
I completely agree with you, and I think that should be reformed as well.
But what is important about Europe is that we have the best deal we possibly can, and we don't say, oh no, because look, when people voted for Brexit, the big thing they were voting against was immigration, right? No question about that. Well, and frankly, your side, and we were on very different sides, your side made much of immigration and slightly, by saying that the Turks were about to come, which was obviously never going to be true, slightly overdid it. But that's what it was not about not being able to share information with Europe. And that's what this is about.
I don't agree with that. I think it was about democracy, if you want to call it sovereignty, but I think it was about who has control. Are you in control of your own destiny, or is it decided overseas? And fundamental to that is, where is your senior court? Now, the European Court of Human Rights is a different type of court because its rules don't take automatic effect. They have to be applied here by our Parliament. That is a really important protection. The European Court of Justice, of course, just the European Union, didn't work like that. It operated automatically. We've already given it the power to operate in Northern Ireland, which is pretty dreadful, and going back into the arrest warrant would give it access to the whole of the UK. It's fundamental to taking away the democratic right to return our sovereignty that we took in that vote in 2016.
I think it's really, really important that for security's sake that we can share things with Europe. That actually, I mean, I think that the Brexit deal that was done was pretty dreadful, and all Keir Starmer is trying to do is to actually get the best deal that we can. But
the sharing of information is something that we're able to do entirely separate from the European Union, and we do it with other countries. And the Five Eyes, which is perhaps the most important sharing of information, done with us, the US, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, is a means of sharing highly sensitive security services information that doesn't require the EU's involvement and is probably more important at stopping threats than anything we can do during the European West.
Well, actually, if we're talking about the boats, then we're talking about Europe. I mean, what we know is there's a massive smuggling operation, that we know the boats are in Germany, and at the moment the Germans say, well, you know, they don't break our laws, is that actually we do need to work with the Europeans to stop the boats. That's what this is about. And if we don't do that, Jacob, nothing moves.
We've been working with the French and giving them millions of pounds, tens of millions of pounds now for years, and that doesn't make any difference.
And I've just talked about Germany. That's why it's got to be the Europeans, because as soon as Germany changes their rules, then the people who sell the boats will put it in Hungary or somewhere else. Is that actually what's so important is that it's European-wide and that we understand that we can't go on doing this.
But there's Interpol and there's Europol. Europol we have an associate status with, where we are working with other countries. And it's quite right that you cooperate without having your system taken over by them. We cooperate with the French, but fat lot of use it does us, or fat lot of use it does us at any time over stopping the boats. The boats keep on coming. The question is whether we should be more Trump-like, who has said that he'd put
build a wall.
Have a 20... well, you can't build a wall in the middle of the channel. 25% tariff on Mexico if they don't help stop illegal migrants getting into the United States. A more robust policy rather than simply giving them money, which they spend on foie gras and claret, I think.
Which is what you would like.
Foie gras goes with Sauterne, doesn't it, not with claret?
you would
very
know.
important to get these things right.
I don't eat foie gras because I actually think it's really cruel to geese. But seriously, if we look at the French, I mean, the French do quite. It's an incredibly long coastline.
Yes.
They'd have to put people all along it. They do stop a lot of boats. They don't stop enough. But the problem, I mean, and we are talking about people who are utterly determined. Two sets of people who are determined. One is the smugglers, right, who are making an awful lot of money. And then, for reasons that might escape both you and me, the people who are coming over who are absolutely, they're desperate to come over. And one talks about, we might send a few of them to Rwanda. That was never a deterrent. I mean, the biggest deterrent is dying. We know that people die as they cross the channel.
I think Rwanda was a bigger deterrent because if we could have got everybody there who arrived, not the backlog, we could have got people there as they arrived, they knew they couldn't succeed.
But that was never ever on the cards.
Hold on, but we all know that we could be run over when we cross the road, but we still cross the road because we think it won't happen to us today. Deterrents only work if you're sure that they will happen. That's why Rwanda needed to be a scheme that was, I'm being told, we've got to stop because we've run out of time. I'm sorry.
Rwanda was never going to be that.
Next time you come on, I'll definitely give you the last word. Scarlett, thank you very much. It's a promise. Politicians promise. In a moment, the polls in the US election are closing, and that's a poll that's on a knife edge. Who will win? We'll try and do our best. Mystic Mogg in the next section. Thank you. Sorry.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Her name is synonymous with fashion. Karen Millen, the high street designer whose dresses have been worn by some of the world's most famous women, including the Princess of Wales.
Yes, but in a recent Daily Mail interview conducted by our showbiz juggernaut, as I call her, Steph Tetchy, 63-year-old Karen confessed she isn't immune from worries about her appearance.
Well, this summer, Karen took the plunge with a £35,000 facelift using the very latest surgical techniques. Now, to hear more of her story, we're delighted to be joined by Karen herself and consultant plastic surgeon Dr. Tunç Tiryaki, co-founder of the London Regenerative Institute. So, how did you two get together?
That was a meeting at the Parliament, wasn't it?
It was actually, yeah, through mutual friends, really.
So you already knew of Tunç and you knew his expertise. How did you come to the decision to kind of go ahead with this? I was reading the Mail article and apparently one day you looked in the mirror, and I've heard this story so many times before,
Yeah, I know,
from not least my mum and my nan,
Yeah.
and they said they looked in the mirror and thought, goodness me.
I know. I think it's that menopausal thing when suddenly things just change. And yeah, for me, it was coming out of lockdown almost, where I was probably on the back end of menopause, and I just suddenly looked in the mirror and it was like, oh my God, what's happened to me?
Because I guess you still, I mean, for me, I'm 35, I still feel like a 20-year-old or even an 18-year-old. Does that change as you get into sort of your...
Unfortunately not, right?
Well, it does change to a certain extent, but, you know, I've always looked after myself, so I've always kept fit and looked after my skin. So, you know, it did come as a bit of a shock. I mean, I know, obviously, ageing happens to us all and we have to embrace that, but there's a certain amount that we have to put up with and then, you know, other things can step in.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were talking about the Reverend Starmer betraying Brexit. And your views has come in. Lawrence says, in, out, shake it all about. I voted to leave, but Jacob, some aspects of the EU would be great to have back. Nothing wrong with rowing back a tad. Fan of the show. Well, I certainly am very grateful for your last comment. And Arnold say, good evening, Sir Jacob. Let's be very careful. President Sarkozy, allegedly Conservative, betrayed French people who voted against during the European Union via referendum. Well, there we go. Thank you for those. Keep them coming in. The day has finally come. The day thou gavest, Lord, has ended for Americans to choose their next president, and pollsters insist the race is too close to call. But what I want to discuss with my most pugnacious panel today was why I believe Donald Trump would be the best result for the UK. Whether it's his love for the United Kingdom, his economic policies, or indeed his foreign policy that was clearly better for global security than Joe Biden's. Well, I'm joined now by Adam Weiss, the co-chairman of New York State's Trump Victory 2020. Well, moments to go before the polls begin to close. What are you hoping is going to be happening? Is it going to be a clear result this evening, or are we going to have to wait weeks for hanging chads and things like that?
Well, thanks for having me. I think they picked up the absentee ballots, the mail-in ballots, where they're counting them much sooner. You know, 4 years ago we had COVID, so there was a lot of, I would say, shenanigans happening and late drop-offs in the middle of the night. So the numbers look good for Republicans. Democrat numbers are down early voting by the millions in a few states. There's big lines in the rural counties of Pennsylvania. Because remember, in America, in the United States, we only have about 7-8 states. We have 50 states, right? But we have 7-8 states that will make the difference of this election. And the numbers look good out of there. And by the close of yesterday, I think Trump was up in all the swing states or tied. So, and the previous two elections, he was down like 7-8 points to Hillary, 8-10 points to Biden. So the fact that he's going in this tied or up is a good sign, because Republicans seem to vote the day of in big numbers.
But this election seems to be particularly aggressive and partisan, doesn't it? That the hostility from the two sides to each other has been really remarkable.
I don't think, they say that because I feel like the media, the mainstream media, the legacy media seems to dislike Trump. He seems to trigger them since 9 years ago when he first went down the escalator. And, somehow he was a lovable figure when a New York celebrity with a big reality show. But after that, they turned on him when they found out he was running as a conservative. But I think it's the Harris campaign that's running such a negative campaign, calling his supporters and from MSG 2 weeks ago, Nazi sympathizers. I mean, the most, deep, terrible things they were saying about Trump supporters, all sorts of, racist, Hitler comparisons. It's really, and it was nonstop negative. I don't think Americans want to just hear constantly negative, 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 negative. They want to be uplifting and positive.
But Donald Trump might have been guilty of a bit of that himself. He hasn't been particularly polite about Nancy Pelosi in the last 24 hours, has he?
I mean, Trump's going to be Trump, but I don't think what he's been through, nobody's been through. 2 impeachments. I don't know how many indictments. I mean, you could just line them up from state to city. The family's been under investigation. He's been under investigation. He's been brutalized for 9 years. He's a billionaire a few times over. He could have just went and spent time with his family, his grandchildren, or relaxed on the beach somewhere and took vacation. But he really wanted, what does he want to do this for? To help America, right? So, if anybody should be a little bit bitter, it should be Donald Trump.
Well, obviously, with the assassination attempts during this campaign, he's had a particularly difficult campaign and has shown great courage. What do you think will happen after the election? Do you think both candidates will accept the result, or that we may be where we were in 2020 when Donald Trump was very reluctant to accept the result?
Really don't know. I think Trump would accept the results as he did last time. He just thought there was a lot of shenanigans. He left. But I think the left, I don't know what the left has done. They've caused so much chaos. And over the last 4 years, 7 years, the second he won last time, they said he didn't win. It was because of Russia. He went through 3 years of a special prosecutor digging and seeing if he was attached to Russia. And at the end, they found that it was all BS. I don't know if the left would tear this country apart if he loses. I don't see them accepting it as just as gracious as they should be.
Well, Adam, I wish you every success this evening. I may be one of the very few Englishmen who is rooting for former President Trump, but I look forward to a Conservative victory. So thank you very much, Adam. I'm joined now by my panel, my most pugnacious panel, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the author and journalist Michael Crick. Now, Kelvin, in spite of your normally right-wing views, you don't want Trump to win. You want Kamala Harris.
I don't want a leader of the United States, the most powerful military force in the world, not to be supportive of the democratic rights of the people of the Ukraine to decide where their borders are and who runs their country. And I worry that if Ukraine falls, I worry for Poland, I worry for Estonia, I worry for Moldova. So actually, in lots of other areas, I love his idea of being strong on migration. I don't like particularly the idea, if I am looking at it through a UK perspective, of a trade war. In which I think I could envisage the UK, of which America is our most important customer, actually suffering quite grievously, blowing Rachel Thieves and co. right out of the water, and therefore affecting our country.
But on Ukraine, I'm told pretty authoritatively that he encouraged Congress to agree the package that went to Ukraine, that he did that quietly and discreetly. And on trade war, he started trade wars last time to get people to open up their markets, that what he wants is genuinely free trade rather than the terrible protectionist racket that the EU runs.
I'm entirely in favour of him whacking 60 and 70% on the Chinese dumpers, whether it's steel or wherever else. I am just concerned that this will spread, as trade wars tend to, into other countries. And we are skinned. Our country is skinned, as Reeves has pointed out, and we can't take another shock. That's what concerns me. Look, in lots of other ways, I love his freebooting. I love the fact that he takes it. But honestly, as a person in this country, he wouldn't become Imagine him standing in Somerset.
I don't think he'd be likely to become the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset, yes. But then nor did I at the last election. Michael, Kamala Harris, would you have any enthusiasm for voting for her?
Well, the problem with Kamala Harris is that we don't... I mean, she hasn't been very explicit on what she stands for. I think it's wonderful news that finally America would have a female president and another president with an ethnic background. But to me, it's all about blocking Trump.
OK, but don't you want
and for the reasons that Kelvin's explained, but also a lot of other reasons.
But don't you want
he's bad for democracy, he's bad for climate change.
Just on one point, you can come back to that. It's the identity politics. I want America to have the best president, not somebody who is male or female or particular ethnic. And indeed, I'm worried about the commentary on this in Kemi. Kemi won because she's a great candidate. We want the best candidate always, not to fall into identity politics.
And, you know, I'm sure if the Democrats had chosen their candidate, if Biden had stood down earlier and they'd had a proper democratic election for the candidate, they might have ended up with a better candidate, yes. But she will, unlike Trump, she will have good advisors around her. She will not be sacking them every few weeks like Trump did last time and no doubt will do this time. And therefore, I'm not worried about... I mean, the United States faces huge problems. Let's not forget that. But I think we're in much safer hands with her than we are with Trump. But the thing about Trump is he's not only mad and criminal, he's incredibly unstable, he's incredibly dishonest. The White House... I mean, talk to Michael Wolff about this, his biographer, who spent a lot of time with him, was utter chaos. We cannot have the Western world represented by a chaotic, criminal, mad... unreliable leader.
Here's utter chaos led to enormously successful economic policy that led to significant growth in the US economy, an extraordinarily effective foreign policy that dealt with Iran properly and didn't give it billions of dollars, that got the Abraham Accords going. So, yes, he's erratic. Yes, he's not polite society, but he's amazingly effective.
You're taking a gamble, though, aren't you, Jacob?
But haven't you become, which I'm surprised by, the ultimate establishment figure? You want a candidate, because it's not Trump, who will be advised by the blob.
Because the man is nuts. I mean, he's nuts, and he is a fascist, actually. He is the most extreme...
What evidence is there for him being a fascist?
Well, he would like total autocracy.
But Churchill would have liked autocracy, but he got it through.
To him, his people have to be loyal to him, not to the American Constitution. They have to be loyal to Trump. He will go out and try and take revenge on all those people who've been involved in prosecuting him.
Ask for personal loyalty. Margaret Thatcher said, "Is he one of us?" But this is the American Constitution.
In America, they're much more hot on these kind of things about loyalty to the Constitution. Whereas in Trump's case, it's loyalty to him. Sycophants only need apply.
Well, I just think that he is a normal political figure. He's
not a normal political figure, Jacob.
Have you ever listened to Barack Obama reading his own book? It is the most extraordinary, vain and arrogant...
Well, the politicians are vain and arrogant.
And Donald Trump is no different. He's a bit more orange than any other than Berlusconi.
How many presidents have been criminals? None.
Well, I don't believe Trump is a criminal.
You don't believe that?
No.
You think he's innocent of all these things that he's either been convicted of or is about to be convicted of?
Well, he hasn't been convicted of, and you're a great one for believing people are innocent until proved guilty.
That's true, yes.
And the only court that's found against him had a Democrat judge in a Democrat state. It was quite an extraordinary...
I think in the circumstances, one shouldn't risk it. There are 350 Americans who could stand... Or take away children. 300 million Americans who could stand for the presidency. He is about the worst of the 300 million.
I think the issue is that the migration issue in the United States is so enormous, and the numbers coming across the borders illegally are so massive that you can see that people will be honestly... So this is my bet, that in the end, Trump wins on the basis that people very quietly, in the same way as they will do, by the way, there's the Senate and the Senate. I expect reform to do spectacularly well in Wales because of migration issues.
We'll have to come back to the Senate rather than the Senate. Thank you very much to my panel. As pugnacious as always, after the messages from our sponsors, as they say in America, as Labour increases tuition fees, a certain forthright former edge of the Sun has a plan to solve the higher education problem once and for all.
Evening. Thanks for joining me for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Mild, misty and murky sums up the weather tomorrow and indeed for the overnight period. High pressure is edging away, but it's still controlling the weather, not just for us, but across most of Europe. In fact, a weak weather front is trying to mix things up a little. That will introduce more cloud and some patchy rain across the far northwest of Scotland. The breeze picking up here as well during this evening. But elsewhere, the winds are pretty light. There's a lot of cloud around. Could be some fog patches, particularly on higher routes, but even at lower levels across parts of the southeast of England, where temperatures will dip down to single figures. Maybe not far off freezing through some parts of northeast Scotland. Here to start Wednesday, but also here we'll have some brighter skies. Elsewhere, well, brightness hard to find. It's a glum start to Wednesday. Thick cloud, mist, drizzle, murky and misty. Some damp conditions over southwest Scotland, particularly over the hills here. But for many, it'll be a dry start. And although it'll be a bit colder in northeast Scotland, we should also see some sunny spells coming through here. A little bit of rain early on across the far north and northwest of Scotland. So that should tend to edge away. We'll keep some thicker cloud around western coast and hills, so a little bit of drizzle. But for most, it'll just be dry and cloudy. Bit more optimistic for some breaks in the cloud tomorrow. North Wales again, parts of northern England too, and again northern Scotland actually seeing some sunny spells here with a bit of sun, 16, maybe 17 or even 18 Celsius. Even where it's cloudy, temperatures a bit higher than today, quite mild really, 13 or 14. But I say overall it is fairly great, as it will be again on Thursday. The breeze getting more noticeable through tomorrow and in the west on Thursday. Further east, mostly it's light winds, so again, just a lot of cloud. Most places dry and temperatures a touch above average. Where we see some sunshine there, those temperatures climbing into the mid-teens. Bye for now.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Court cases.
A presidential dropout.
Assassination attempts.
This has been a US election like no other.
And if the polls are correct, it's on a knife edge.
Stay up with us as the drama unfolds and America decides their next president.
We'll discuss what it means for them, for the world, and for our special relationship. America Decides, tonight from 11.
Only on GB News.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about the US election, debating quite fiercely, and Brian says it's not who votes that count, but who counts the votes. And this time there mustn't be any doubt who's won. That's a fair point. Robert, dear Jacob, how can anyone in the UK call Trump a liar when we have Starmer as Prime Minister? The least honest man in the country. Well, there might be other contenders for that role. Even I'm not sure he's the least honest man in the country. There may be some in Wormwood Scrubs who would give him some competition. And off topic, Ian says, why do we change Starmer's nickname to when do we change Starmer's name to Lord Protector? Which you will remember was, of course, the title that Oliver Cromwell gave himself when he had had the head of the king chopped off. Labour has broken yet another promise, ties in with Robert's point. This time it has increased tuition fees, albeit by a modest amount, £285. However, it was the Reverend Starmer himself who, when he stood to be Labour leader, promised to abolish tuition fees altogether. The real question is broader than this. In 1980, only 15% of students went to university, but now it's 40%. So has a degree lost its cachet? Is it time to start cutting back on some of the more ridiculous degrees in subjects like surf science or contemporary circus? Well, I'm joined now by my panel, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the author and journalist, Michael Crick. Bit of circus performance for your degree, Kelvin?
Yes, well, as you know, if you followed my tweets, you will know anyway, I am massively hostile to the, and it's available in 240 universities in our country, into media studies. Now, media studies, actually, the truth about the matter is you end up with a huge bill at the end of it, can be up to 50,000 quid. There are very, very few jobs in the media. And those jobs that exist are at massively low pay. Literally 11.44 an hour starting. And there's nothing that you will learn, having been at university doing media studies, that you wouldn't have learned better had you been 18 years old and had A-levels, we'll say, pretty good, OK, and gone straight into work with somebody. And one of the effects of that is that a load of people who have taken these daft degrees are now doing what? Call centres? Are they working? I'm very grateful for Tesco's and everybody offering these jobs. There are no jobs in the media. And the other thing about the media is that you can be a good person at your job, whether it's television or radio or even print in some kind of form, and actually be something else. You can be a damn good surveyor, you can be a very good engineer, but you can also have an expertise which is useful, for instance, coming on GB News or writing an article for the Times or the Telegraph. It is a ridiculous degree, and the sooner we dump them, the better, and do important things like what Dyson does, that University for Engineers. Do something which will earn you money.
It's essentially a con on people, isn't it, that it makes them think they will earn higher wages, and yet lots of these degrees aren't going to lead to that. But lots of employers demand degrees for jobs that don't necessarily need them as a basic qualification. So how do you square that circle?
Well, I mean, you know, students are going to have to look at what happens to the people who do the courses like media studies and journalism and actually ask themselves how many of them get jobs, or do they actually get jobs in other walks of life? They have to, you know, there's a market here and that's how it's been designed. And indeed, media studies, I mean, I was on the governing body of the University of Kent until a few weeks ago, and we had to close down our journalism course. We had to make cuts because of all sorts of financial problems, and the same is probably going on elsewhere. But, I mean, you know, all sorts of people do one degree at university and then they end up doing something totally different. They're not just learning about how to be a journalist, how to make films or whatever. They are learning how to think. They are learning the general professional processes.
What was your degree?
PPE.
PPE, Irish history.
I got one GCSE or one O-level, as it was in my day, and I actually did that in 17 attempts. So what about that? Must be a new world.
Okay,
yeah.
So
my parents were horrified.
One of the most successful journalists of modern times, you didn't need to do a degree at all.
Nor does anybody, and this is happening in accountancy as well. So accountant groups, right? Small ones, large ones, so it could be, you know, KPMG or something like that, and also small ones like Round My Way. OK, they're all taking them on at 18. Everything you need to learn about putting those numbers together, you don't need to go to uni to do it, and you don't need to rack up 50,000 quid. We have got to have universities which are going to turn out people which are actually, they're going to be able to proceed into a decent job and decent money. We've got tech coming down the highway right now, which can see a lot of people out of work. You've got to have something special about you.
Final word.
Well, I mean, I think the problem is that if people don't go to university, they will find it even harder with the advent of AI, because the jobs that are going to survive longer under AI are those which require some
in that case, they should do computing degrees. Then.
Well, a lot of them do.
Well, all right, my programmer tells me that I have to move on. So remember the 5th of November, the day a petition to Downing Street sought to snuff out our firework freedom. A killjoy woman from Lincolnshire has today delivered an appeal to the Prime Minister calling for the restriction of firework use exclusively to bonfire night or other traditional festivals. Oh, Yawnsville, come on. Do we have to regulate everything? Is there no spirit of fun and allowing people just to enjoy themselves and set off the odd firework?
Well, it is irritating to get woken up at midnight by loud bangs.
But they're not allowed between 11 o'clock and 7 in the morning.
In practice, does anybody apply those rules? I mean, I feel quite anti-firework because my sister and her family, their house was hit by an industrial firework which came from the street above and went straight through their roof and bounced down, and you know, much of their interior was completely gutted, and thankfully nobody was at home. So I'm hostile from that point of view. On the other hand, I do feel we can't just the answer to every problem in life isn't more and more rules. Because, frankly, the police haven't got time to regulate those kind of rules. Council officials haven't got time to regulate those rules. And I think actually a bit of a simplification when it comes to rules would actually make it easier to apply them.
So let me just speak on behalf of dogs. Right? Anybody who's had a dog knows that they absolutely detest fireworks. But however, if you've got them in the house with you and everything, something to live on the way here tonight, actually, past my cemetery, OK, what was going on in there?
Well, in the cemetery?
In the cemetery, they were letting the fireworks off. Now, first of all, I was irritated by that. And then I thought to myself, well, perhaps there aren't a lot of places around here which has green or anything.
November is the month of the Holy Souls, so you hope that you are firing the Holy Souls up to heaven, is all I can think of.
That hadn't occurred to me. But look, the truth about what's happened to firework night on November the 5th and any other time is that Halloween is taking its place. I mean, and so it used to be right up there, and Halloween was this rather daft idea from America now, and then the kids began enjoying the dressing up, and it's gone like that. So I expect the lady may have a point, but actually, taking your point, do we really need to regulate it? My answer is no. It's going to die on the vine.
And we do all these regulations, and then people hate it when the regulations enforced. So we had this chap who was fined for leaving his walking stick behind when he'd been picking litter. And so you set all these things up, then they're enforced, and everybody says, well, that's ridiculous. It's like 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, that anybody caught speeding at 24 miles an hour thinks it's monstrous, as do all their friends. So it's where we've got to be careful about regulating, because what comes in turns out not to be that popular after all.
And if you don't enforce a rule, that undermines rules in general. I mean, it's like in football. You know, nobody enforces the 6-second rule for goalkeepers holding the ball. And to me, that undermines the rules of football in general. It makes referees look weak.
Hold on. As somebody who's just been done with 24 miles an hour or 23 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour limit in London, I can honestly say I've never... Have you ever tried driving at 20 miles an hour?
It's extremely difficult.
A nightmare.
No, actually, I've learned how to do it now.
Oh, have you?
Very good.
Well, I'll be done next week.
But we've had a State of the Nation first, a footballing comparison rather than a cricketing one. We're more used to them being references to cricket. Anyway, thanks to my panel. After the break, we'll be revealing the hidden government debt crisis that could represent a time bomb for the nation's finances.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
What do you think?
Morning. I think we have failed young drivers as a society, and we need to train them better and train them earlier. I think that the idea of stopping them carrying passengers for 6 months is a good idea, because you've got peer pressure within a car. So yes, but I think graduated licenses are really difficult. You've got what we call the 3 E's, which is education, educating kids to drive earlier, and engineering, which is making roads better and safer, and then comes enforcement at the end of it. So I think we're failing in these two first ones, the education and the enforcement. I put my kids, all 3 of them, through a thing called Young Driver, which allows under 17s to drive on private land with ADI instructors and learn the craft of driving and all the below the dashboard stuff and hazard awareness long before they try and do this very compressed period of time to learn about driving. I think we're failing them. So I want to see it in schools, and I want to see them being taught much, much earlier.
Nobody's actually pointing the finger of blame, I think, at the young driver, but maybe young drivers don't understand how different it is. You feel you can drive, you've passed your test, and then a load of your friends get in the back, and suddenly the mood is different, the pressure on you as a driver is very different, showing off, just larking around and having a great time. Aisha, how do you feel about the fact that clearly young drivers do need to be protected almost from themselves, don't they?
Well, I do agree with some of what Quentin has just said, especially about starting early, and especially about getting young people used to the dangers of being on the road.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark Meets at My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we're talking about tuition and fireworks and universities, and Elizabeth makes the very good point. Why don't they charge universities 20% VAT as they have private schools? Now, I wonder if schools may want to reclassify themselves as universities. And Richard, to get better value for the taxpayer, universities should be responsible for repaying the student loan themselves and collecting it from the student. Any shortfall to come out of their own resources. That should swiftly put an end to the Mickey Mouse degrees. Richard, I think that's an excellent point. And off-topic, nice comment from John. Jacob, you're on fire this evening. Well, it's lucky I'm not going to be put on top of a bonfire, because that's going to be happening later in Lewis and places like that. Now, my next guest has claimed that if the welfare state were a pensions or insurance company like Aviva or the Prudential, the regulators would already be closing it down. Government financial forecasts do not take account of what are known as unfunded liabilities, things like the public sector pension bill, which is estimated to be worth roughly 220% of GDP. How do we plan to pay for this? The answer appears to be that no one really knows. But my next guest, John Penrose, the former Conservative MP and, dare I say, a Somerset MP, so clearly extremely civilised, has done more work than most on this problem and has some ideas to solve this looming debt crisis. John, first of all, thank you for coming in. What I'd like you to do to begin with is explain the problem, because this isn't party political. This is a problem of the state finances.
Absolutely right. And what the Labour Party has done is they've produced this new balance sheet, which is designed to show that actually they've got a bit more borrowing room, because Rachel Reeves wanted to find some excuse to allow her to borrow more money. But what actually it's done is they've left off all these really big and important liabilities, these effective long-term debts, the sorts of things you were just describing. And if you leave things out of your balance sheet, guess what? You can paint any picture you like if you're not being honest.
But we did the same. So the Tories are just as culpable in terms of not telling people what these liabilities were. But if you could run through them, what are they? And why don't people know about them?
So what are they? They are, you mentioned the public sector pensions, so lots and lots of public sector workers. Some have funded pensions. Those are like the ones that Prudential or many of your viewers may have with their company pensions. But some are unfunded, so they're paid for by you and me out of current tax revenues.
And those are the big ones. Those are the National Health, the police, the fire brigade, the civil service.
Things like that.
Yeah.
But even bigger than all of that is the state pension. That's completely unfunded. That's paid for today out of your and my taxes.
Many people think that national insurance goes into a pot and they then retire with money coming out of that pot. That's not true.
No, exactly right. And the problem with it is that if you have something where today's taxpayers pay for today's pensioners' pensions, if you have a demographic time bomb, if you have an ageing society like we and many other countries have, that means you've got more and more pensioners claiming on fewer and fewer working-age people, and that's an unsustainable proposition. So it doesn't work. It means that we actually have a fundamentally bust system. The welfare state as we know it is not financially sustainable, and we've got to do something about it.
And you've done some of the calculations on this, and they're done on the basis of a private sector pension fund, aren't they? So this is something that's fairly well known, that this isn't novel economic concepts you're coming up with.
Not at all, no. And this is something which you mentioned, the Aviva or the Prudential. They value the cost of the liabilities that they're promising to pay everyone's pensions on. Fairly standard methodology. If you apply that to things like the state pension, it's 220-something% of GDP. That blows a complete hole in Rachel Reeves' numbers, and dare I say it, every other chancellor's too.
And these are state liabilities just like gilt-edged securities, aren't they? They are the same value because the government has promised to pay them. You can't take pensions away. You may be able to delay the retirement age, but the WASPy women weren't very keen on that. But what you're not going to be able to do is simply say, we are not paying a state pension.
So I mean, there's a technical difference between a public sector pension which is which is contractual, and a benefit or a politician's promise, which is what the state pension is. But nonetheless, if you try to not pay it, I mean, all hell will break loose.
You'd have riots.
Yeah, you'd have riots. So I think we can say that in practice they are the same thing.
Stage one is that you've identified the problem. Stage two is valuing it, the scale of it. What is stage three? How do we deal with this? Because these sums are so enormous.
Enormous, yeah. Well, I think the answer is that having it's like everyone's saying that when they first discover they've got a problem with alcohol, the first thing to do is to admit it to yourself. And I think we just got to face up to the fact as a society that over it's taken 50 years for the welfare state to get to this stage. It'll probably take at least 50 years to get out of it, but start we must.
And how do you get out of it? Do you begin to fund future state pensions, or do you begin to put money aside? I know that employers now make a contribution into private funds for their employees. Do you try to shift to that?
So I think to begin with, you need to give the government of the day a legal duty to just improve it by even just a tiny bit each year, because saving for a pension is a long-term thing. You start doing it little and often, and they can either do it by trying to realise some of the other assets, which the government owns huge numbers of assets elsewhere. You can put some of those against the pensions and try to create a funded pension. Other thing which I've been suggesting as well is other countries have a sovereign wealth fund. Now, if we had a sovereign wealth fund, you'd have to start now, and it would take years. But if you had a sovereign wealth fund, you can start to build a funded pot. But again, it's a project of generations.
But there are ways of doing this. I used to invest money for the Canadian State Pension Fund, the PIP, which issued bonds to the value of the liability, which could be sold gradually, so they didn't flood the market. And this moved to a funded pension. Singapore has a phenomenal wealth fund.
Yeah.
And I thought we could use our overseas aid budget as investment rather than expenditure, and then you build up a wealth fund, admittedly over 50 years, because it's all very, very long term. But it's how do you build up these pots of money?
There are lots of possible solutions to it, but the important thing is to take a long-term view and to plant some acorns so that a forest of mighty oak trees will in due course grow. And you've got to find the money, start small, but keep going.
And how long have people known about this problem?
Well, I've been banging on about it for ages, but I think it's one of those things that it's rather like someone who knows they've got a problem with debt. They know it's there, and then they try and avoid talking about it, and they kid themselves. And I'm afraid that's what we've been doing as a nation.
And we've got to talk about it. John, thank you very much for joining me this evening. Next, it's Patrick Christys. Patrick, what have you got on your show this evening?
Tonight's show is absolutely huge, Jacob. Ed Miliband has serious questions to answer. We might have caught him out on something big. You're not going to want to miss that at 9 p.m. A pro-Palestine march is planned for Remembrance Sunday. Should that be stopped? Should we ban fireworks as well? One Labour MP certainly thinks so. Talking of fireworks, we're building up for the US election as well. And asylum seekers being fast-tracked from Afghanistan. Should we only really be taking the women, Jacob?
Well, Patrick, your programme is always a display of fireworks, so I think it'll be extremely exciting. And the Trump election will come up. You'll be doing that, won't you? The absolute lead-up. You'll get the exit polls.
Yeah, exactly. And from 10:30, we are really building up to that fabulous night of coverage that we've got here at GB News from 11 p.m. onwards with Stephen and Ellie and a whole host of top stars. But I'll be taking you stateside at about 10:30. This is the only place to be for the US election coverage.
Well, I'm going home and I'm going to be glued to GB News all evening, I think, until the early hours, so it'll be fantastic to watch. That's coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and you will want to know what the weather forecast is. Well, I can tell you, in Somerset, the weather will be absolutely beautiful, and the beaches in John Penrose's old constituency of Weston-super-Mare will be so good. There'll be sand and donkeys and every fun and luxury, only in Somerset.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening. Thanks for joining me for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Mild, misty and murky sums up the weather tomorrow and indeed for the overnight period. High pressure is edging away, but it's still controlling the weather, not just for us, but across most of Europe, in fact. A weak weather front is trying to mix things up a little. That will introduce more cloud and some patchy rain across the far northwest of Scotland. The breeze picking up here as well during this evening. But elsewhere, the winds are pretty light. There's a lot of cloud around. Could be some fog patches, particularly on higher routes, but even at lower levels across parts of the southeast of England, where temperatures will dip down to single figures. Maybe not far off freezing through some parts of northeast Scotland. Here to start Wednesday, but also here we'll have some brighter skies. Elsewhere, well, brightness hard to find. It's a glum start to Wednesday. Thick cloud, mist, drizzle, murky and misty. Some damp conditions over southwest Scotland, particularly over the hills here. But for many, it'll be a dry start. And although it'll be a bit colder in northeast Scotland, we should also see some sunny spells coming through here. A little bit of rain early on across the far north and northwest of Scotland. So that should tend to edge away.